Welcome to the Responsible Parent Podcast, where overwhelmed families curious about naturally regulating their nervous system can find answers. I'm your host, Caylie O'Patik, and in each episode, I'll cover a topic you've been wanting to understand more about and serve as a reminder to you that everything is cyclical and connected. Today, we have an herbalist and parent here in Southeast Michigan who's been studying herbs for 30 years, mostly using the plants that grow wild around him. He's taught classes throughout the US, Canada, and Ireland, and taught both in-person and online classes. So welcome, Jim McDonald.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. We were just chatting a little bit before this, but it looked like you were steeping your tea that I sent you.
Yes, I got my here. So I've got the loose leaf tea, which is always pretty wonderful, and my
Yes.
little wooden strainer top thing,
Oh, I really like that.
and my Great Lakes Herb Fair mug.
Oh,
Uh,
your mug matches mine in colors,
oh, nice.
looks like, but not, I don't have the cool herb fair one. I'll have to go this year. It's in the fall, right?
It is the weekend after Labor Day.
Okay. Yep. And then I'll be able to get my own mug maybe.
There's always going to be mugs there. It's like,
Yeah.
if we're looking at vendors and there's not someone with mugs yet, we're like, wait, we don't have a mug person
We
yet.
need a mug person.
Mug person always needs to be a mug person there.
Oh, I love that. I actually just told this story this past week, but I'm not I'm sincerely not a very materialistic person. Um, and I've been really good at letting go of things that I've acquired and, just kind of letting things come in and out of my life. But there are two things that I sincerely miss letting go of, but I think it was because I didn't let go of them. But one of them was a mug, and it was like a handcrafted mug, and I got it from a secondhand shop when I was maybe 16, 17 years old, where I grew up. And I brought it with me when I went out to college in Chicago. And it was this kind of like a light tan to a dark brown, kind of latte colored ombre glaze. And it was just like the way that it felt and the way it fit in my hand. Like I went to the shop and I saw it and I was like, ooh, mine. And it was like 25 cents. Was my favorite mug. And so ever since then, I've tried to find one to replace its specialness in my life, and I haven't. This one's close, but
There are 2 mugs that I'm still in a state of mourning for, and one's like 20 years gone, the handle cracked on it, and I had it for a long time. It had a nice life and everything, but some of them like, "Oh, I wish I still had that mug."
yeah,
And then there's another one, I have something that's similar to it, but it's not the same.
yeah,
It's not the same. It's really hard to you know mugs are so like, if you're getting handmade mugs, they're so unique,
they
and
really are.
really interesting seeing, like, what kind of mug each individual person likes. Because sometimes, like, someone shows me their favorite mug, and I'm like, "Ooh, that would not be my favorite mug," but I'm so because I love mine, and they feel the same way, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so true. Absolutely. Or if you go into somebody's kitchen and you see like all of their mugs are like the same and lined up versus if they collect, like a same type but different variations of it or yeah, I always find that interesting too. Did not think I was going to talk to you about mugs today. I'm really into it.
Be careful, we have a limited amount of time, and I'm a
Right.
rambler.
Exactly.
You mentioned something at the beginning, it's like overwhelmed parents. Are there overwhelmed parents? Is that
You
the thing?
know, I've found in my studies, no, just existing on planet Earth that yes, there are quite overwhelmed parents. Yeah, I struggled for a while trying to niche down and I knew that there was something that needed to come through me that had to do with naturally parenting in one way, shape, or form. And then it was actually only about 2 weeks ago. I was in a meditation. I popped up like a crazy person out of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, everything that I want to talk about has to do with regulating your nervous system. And I that stems from my journey and my daughter's journey as well, and I've all of a sudden, all the dots kind of connected, and I started drawing the lines, and I was like, "Ah, this is what we've been doing, and all of these tools that I've been collecting have been helping us with that." And so, yeah, overwhelmed, everybody's overwhelmed. We're just so overstimulated, right? So
As a therapist, it's probably my like, lots of different practitioners have their biases, and it's not like you only have one, right? But
yeah,
someone's big bias might be like sugar, or their big bias might be, you're allergic to food allergies, or you have nutrient deficiencies, and all of those things have a place. But like, if I had a bias that's kind of like always there, it's, oh, yeah, you're stressed out and it affects everything. Like, even your food allergies might be occurring because you're stressed out. And when you're stressed out, you have less digestive secretions to properly break down your food. And then when it gets into your gut, it's not properly broken down. And then your body has to deal with it. So, like, stress is something I keep coming back to. And although I don't like to disbelieve people when they tell me, things when they're, 'cause I'm supposed to believe people.
right.
But if I'm talking with someone and they're like, "No, I'm not really stressed," I'm like, "No, really? Like, are you a week into falling in love? And it's like, give it time."
Yeah,
Um, or even, yeah, that's just like, how could you be around and existing, and
right,
especially if you have a family and children,
right.
and you're having to navigate meeting other people's needs and that weird, incredibly difficult balance of your own needs and requirements, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
the smaller your kids are, the less important, the less you get to prioritize your own needs and requirements.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a friend who just launched a course this week actually that helps with getting new parents ready for their first kid and a whole course on being nested and nurtured and kind of starting to regulate your nervous system before all this happens and being prepared for it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so incredible. I can't imagine. I have one kid and she is now 10. And I'm like, if I would have had that a decade ago, the
Uh,
difference it could have made, whereas I was completely unprepared. I was just winging it like majority of parents are, right? Just winging it. We live in a society that is so overstimulated and overwhelmed and stressed. And I've found stress manifest in my life physically. I let it go to that point, right? I let it get
mhm.
all the way until I start gaining weight and my lymphatic system is showing me through swollen lymphs and I start breaking out in different areas and then I have to take a step back and be like, oh, "Okay." And for me, it's been because I've been a corporate maven and I just recently this fall actually got laid off in December officially. And so I've stepped into, all right, I'm not going to go back to that. And we're going to try out this podcast thing. We're going to just lean into everything that's been helping me in the journey, right? Instead of kind of trying to balance it again, because there is no balance with that life, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way that the culture works and the society works is too much.
Yeah.
Right. And probably the reason that my bias is that stress is like at the root, like, it's either a causative or aggravating factor. So even if it's not causative, and most of the times it's at least partially causative, right? It's definitely an aggravating factor, is because it's everywhere. And the way that this culture functions, this sort of like Western North American culture, I can't speak to other cultures, it's the
Yeah.
one that I live in, is go, go, do, go, achieve, go, actually overachieve,
Yeah.
do, go, oh, you're getting tired, stimulants,
Yeah.
oh, and I like coffee, I like tea, yeah, stimulants are fine and everything. But if that's what's required to keep up with the pace of life, that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that people learn, that I'm always really feel dedicated to helping people unlearn, is we learn these ideologies about, like, oh, my adrenals are worn out or fried or burned out or depleted or exhausted. And adrenal exhaustion, I know this is going to ruffle some feathers, adrenal exhaustion physiologically is not a thing, right? How you feel when you think you have adrenal exhaustion, that's totally real. That's totally 100% a thing. But, like, I've seen people exhausted with high cortisol and with low cortisol and with normal cortisol. It's not the adrenal thing. And I think that what we did is we picked one gland in the body that has one stress hormone, and we blamed the whole pattern on that one thing. And it just, like, we could not do that. We could be like, my neuroendocrine system is dysregulated. That would be completely accurate. But even then, The thing that I don't like about like the my adrenals are burned out or crashed or wrecked or whatever is people think there's something wrong with me.
Mm,
And I'm like, "Oh, wait, you're exhausted and depleted because you're trying to keep up with an unreasonable pace
yep,
of the world at large. If you feel kind of terrible and like you can't handle anymore, that's actually a sign that your body's working correctly,
right,
right?" Oh, that makes more sense as a physiological response than being able to endlessly amp up to keep up. As you get more exhausted, you amp up a little bit more and you get more depleted. You can't, keep up. You amp up a little bit more. That would be physiologically dysfunctional.
right.
And if people can understand, like, oh, okay, my body's working right, it's giving me signs that this pace is unachievable. It can actually, like, decrease some of the stress because on top of keeping up with everything, they don't have to feel like there's something wrong with them or there's some inadequacy, right,
Yes,
that is going to increase their sense of fear or their sense of unease or their sense of anxiety. We just don't need to add that on top of everything.
absolutely. I love that you brought that up, for several reasons. I'm gonna, like, dovetail off of it a little bit. So, the interview I had earlier today is actually with one of my good friends, Erin Battenberg. She is a practicing therapist, and she is going to start integrating nature therapy into her work.
Yeah.
But that was something she brought up is almost 100% of her clients come to her, and the first thing they say is, "Something's wrong with me. What's the one thing I need to do to fix it?" And she's like, "It's not something wrong with you. It's you what's happening is pointing to something that needs to be looked at." And it's never just one thing, it's and
Mm,
so I love that you brought that up because we just had a conversation about that from Western medicine's point of view as well. And
yeah.
so, I love that, that continuation of a theme. And also, my life in general seems to work in themes. I'm really good at connecting the dots. And
Yeah.
I actually think that I know that going to your class, which was herbs for stress and anxiety, what was it, 4 weeks ago,
Something like
at
that.
Blandford, yep, Nature Center, actually helped me come to the realization that um, this was going to be my theme for my brand and my podcast is to be able to
Oh,
address, yeah, because it was one of the things that just kind of, that theme kept popping up, and I was like, "Herbs for stress and anxiety." And I know I mentioned in my email to you, my initial one, that I really haven't done a whole lot of herbal study when it comes to anything outside of me foraging, right? So, like,
mm,
I really was just an intuitive forager, which I'm interested in your story about this too, but I was an intuitive forager and I'd get something and then I'd be like, why am I called to this? And then I'd go back home and I'd look up what it is and what it's good for. And I'd be like, oh, I need that right now. And then the more that I did that and created that relationship with the plants, I started getting things that were for not just me, but like people who were close to me. And then I was like, oh, okay. And so that's been my relationship with like herbalism in general. And so my little apothecary that I have in my kitchen is just all things that I've foraged in some way, shape, or form. Um, so that was my first class that was these things may not be readily available in my backyard or in my woods
mm.
or whatever. But I want to learn about them anyways because it's still some sort of herb craft that I can use. And so it was really branching out for me and I loved it. And what I found the most intriguing about your class was that you spoke about the way that people respond to stress differently. Because I
Yeah.
feel like, especially in Western medicine, that isn't necessarily addressed. At least I haven't seen it. If you're stressed or if you have anxiety, there's kind of this blanket, like, here's something for anxiety or here's something for stress. Um, and you were like, well, if somebody's response to stress is to shut down, there's an herb for that. And if somebody's response to stress is hyperactivity, there's an herb for that. And I thought that was my biggest takeaway. And it really got me thinking. I actually went back and talked to my friend Erin about it. I was like, this is crazy. But I just I loved that, attention to detail, right? And not blanket statementing everything, and so I don't know if you wanna talk a little bit more about that, but I'm sure our listeners would get a lot of credit out of that as well.
So in so conventional medicine, right? So in conventional medicine, the way they will often assess something like anxiety or depression is very quantitatively, it's like mild, moderate, severe. And in conventional holistic medicine, which is a thing,
Mhm.
there's a lot of what I and friends of mine who are herbalists will say is like name association herbalism. Like, oh, you can't sleep, you take valerian. You're feeling depressed, you take St. John's wort. You're feeling anxious, maybe you take kava kava. You're getting sick, you take echinacea or elderberry. And where is the person in that? If a tenet of holistic medicine is that we work with the person and not with sort of their illness, but then we have like, oh, if someone has influenza, this is what we do. Or if they have insomnia, this is what we do. Then we're not really working with the person. And for me, there's a lot of different kinds of herbalists. I am a very plant centric herbalist, right? I just kind of fell into this, like not intentional at all. It's not like one day I was like, what a brilliant career choice would be. I should be an herbalist. It's probably more realistic than poet, you know, maybe on par with musician. Um,
Right.
And when you learn about plants and you go back and you look, and if we go back and we want to cite herbalism, we want to go back and look at older traditions, we can cite Western herbalism, European based. We can cite Chinese medicine. We can cite Ayurvedic medicine, because they were the people who wrote stuff down. There is a lot of traditions that I can't cite because they were oral traditions,
Mhm.
right? And this even means like a lot of Western folk tradition that wasn't written down by the people who actually practiced medicine that way, but got written down after the Romans conquered them and wrote about like what the Celts did. And that's kind of the same as like the way that in this country it was colonized and people wrote down like what the Native Americans did. But it's like our outsider interpretation of that, and it loses a lot of its context. But if we go back and we look at um, some older things, we see that mild, moderate, and severe and stronger and weaker herbs for anxiety is not the right way to think about it. Is that, herbs might be better for people who respond to stress with anger and frustration or with um, overwhelm and cloudy thinking or with like, that thing that parents will relate to is the kids get overtired and they get kind of wild and crazy and hyperactive, you know?
Mhm.
And actually, since it's a parenting podcast, you can just take children that are too tired, they've been awake for too long, and think about the different directions they could go. Some get irritable and have tantrums, right? Um, some get wild and hyper. Some maybe start crying and get really emotional. And some maybe like just sort of like shut down and withdraw. That's kind of how they might respond if they're overtired or how they respond to stress. And that's really not a whole lot different than the way that people respond. I mean, we would like to think that as people get older and more emotionally mature that they don't have tantrums anymore. But then you look the way that some adults behave and you're like, oh, wait, whether it's in business and work environments, where employers or employees are, kind of freaking out, having a tantrum, or if we look at politicians in the country, like these same patterns, they exist because that's the way that humans respond to stress.
Right.
And the way that I think about it as someone who's plant centric is that well, humans co-evolved with plants.
Yeah.
Plants are our ancestors. They were here a long time before we were, but they have their individual ways that they might suit one presentation of how a person is responding to stress better than another one. Just
Absolutely.
like some plants are better for like a wetter, damper cough, and some plants are better for a drier, tighter respiratory condition. The same thing goes with our emotional and cognitive responses. The plants, like we want to choose the one that's the most appropriate for what we want to do. Do we need to like lift our spirits instead of move energy because we feel slow and sluggish and exhausted, but nervous exhaustion? So we're like exhausted, but we can't really rest.
Yes.
Or we need to like reel things in because when we have like a nervous anxiety and we have all kinds of energy, but not the ability to like focus it.
Sure.
And then, of course, we could oscillate between those and all over the place. And so, like, to me, navigating that realm
Mhm.
is what helps me be effective.
Yeah.
because I want to be able to give the person the thing that's right for them. You know, I want to give them something that, there's a plant called kava kava. This is not a local plant that grows in Michigan. It's from the South Pacific. But like if someone is like really sluggish and exhausted and kind of like they just don't have the energy and they're like a lot of their anxiety is like, how can I like I'm so anxious because I can't get anything done because I'm so tired and exhausted and I just can't get up.
Yep.
That's not the kind of person that you give kava kava to
No.
because kava is more for a lot of mental tension and their mental energy is all over the place. It's settling and relaxing, and the other person doesn't need that, you know?
Right.
So it's the most important part of herbalism. It's the part of herbalism that makes it about the person and the part of herbalism that makes it work, you know? So as I learn new plants, I would be like, oh, where do they fall into that? And for me, the way that I figure that, it's not like I don't research. It's not like I don't read stuff and study things and talk to my colleagues, but it's always like everything that I use is stuff that I've used myself, that I've tried
Yeah.
myself. And then hey, sometimes I do take things that are probably not ideal for me, right?
Right.
Um, just in a sense of them,
Yeah.
because suggesting herbs to someone that I've never tried
Right.
would be like making a dinner for someone that I put it in their plate. I'm like, here, eat that. And they're
Right.
like, oh, tell me about it. I'm like, I've never tasted it. I don't know. That would
Only
be
if
a
it's
weird
good.
thing to
Yeah.
do, right? It's to someone food that you've never tasted, but I feel like in, the holistic medicine world, that happens all the time where people, like, they know about things, but they don't know the thing on a very personal, in your body kinda level. For me,
Absolutely.
it's what I wanna have, and that's what I'm base my understanding of how I'm gonna suggest herbs for people on.
I love that. And I think that that applies to Western medicine as well, right? Like most therapists or most doctors who are going to prescribe, Adderall or Ritalin probably haven't taken it for a few months on end, themselves necessarily. I
Yeah.
actually, when I was in high school, briefly dated a guy who was addicted to Adderall. And so I took it for a while and did like a whole case study on it because I was so intrigued on what it was doing to his brain, how he was feeling, and then what the science was behind all of it. Broke up with him. We just weren't meant to be together, but it was interesting for me to dive
Yeah,
into,
yeah.
like actually taking it and understanding, like, oh, this is how I'm feeling when I'm on it. Is that how you feel? And then having those conversations. And yeah, I love that approach.
Right.
And actually, when I was at your plant talk, your herb talk, I picked up a couple of your tinctures. Um, I picked up the type A ether for my daughter and myself because that's absolutely what we need. You passed around the blue vervain, and I was like, "Yep, that's the one. I hope he has a tincture of that." And you did. I was like, "Good." But then I picked up the heart easer as well, and I wasn't exactly sure why, but I was like, I feel like I'm going to need this. And I watch two extra kids on Fridays, my friends' kids, and they're two little boys. One's 4, and one is almost 2, and they're all boy, which is amazing. But they came in last Friday just you could just tell their hearts were closed. I mean, they wanted to physically fight each other, which isn't like them, and just all of the emotions were elevated, but because they were hurt, coming from a place of like being hurt, you could tell. And I was like, they weren't tired, they weren't hungry. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I texted their dad and I was like, permission to like break out some herbs and like do some hippie rituals outside with them. And he was like, yeah, totally go for it. And so I had these little juice boxes and I put the straw in, squeezed out half the juice, and then put, like, a whole dropper full in each of them. Shook them up, gave it to them. And since the heart easer has the hawthorn berry and the linden in it, they didn't
Mhm.
even taste it, and they guzzled down their half of their juice boxes. And I kid you not, Jim, I mean, there's no way it's even a placebo effect because they had no idea what was being given to them, which isn't recommended, right? Like, obviously, that's just we don't wanna, like, trick
Yeah.
people into taking medicine, but I did, and it totally worked. We went outside also in in, um, addition to, giving them their juice, and so I think that those things kinda worked together, and I just had them kind of observe, like, "Hey, let's look for signs of spring together," and then I had, them work with my daughter to take pictures of signs of spring while they're doing it, but I noticed almost instantaneously, like, it almost was like their hearts just felt more healed, right? Like, they just felt more
Mm.
seen, and it wasn't really a change of what we were doing, like, we were being attentive to them and, so I saw that, work rate in action, and I was like, "That's why I picked it up." I didn't know why yet, and it was for the boys on a random Friday, so I just wanted to share that because I thought it was really special. I know that you had mentioned in the class that, sometimes the best medicine is just when you take your tincture and before you take it for whatever reason, if you're
Yeah,
stressed, if you have
yeah,
anxiety, and just have that intention and just kind of, okay, really stressed and feeling this way right now, and take a breath and take it. That sometimes that intention itself is more powerful, than anything. And
yeah.
I
It's
totally
a
believe
it's a
that.
catalyst, and it could be tincture or like I've got this tea here, right? And so I could just guzzle down the tea
Right.
while I'm doing a bunch of things and not really pay attention to it. But if I take a moment and smell the tea and think about why I'm drinking the tea or that you sent me the tea, and I get to drink the tea and talk with you, which is super cool. And then, like just hold it and taste, like consciously taste it for a moment. Things will work better, right?
Right.
I think that sometimes if I talk about this with herbs, people are like, "Oh, okay, yeah, whatever." But if you mention something different, like if you mention like, "Oh, have you ever heard that like if you are trying to do a whole bunch of other things while you're eating your dinner, you won't actually metabolize it as well?"
Mhm.
People are like, "Yeah, I've heard that." It's like it's the same thing,
Right.
right? That moment of attention and intention,
Mhm.
it's really important, it's a really important opportunity to acknowledge where you're at and acknowledge like what you're using your herb for or what you would like out of your or even just to feel gratitude for the herb, right?
Right.
Because you might be drinking it thinking like, I am not keeping up. I'm not gonna get it that done. Hell, it's just gonna have to be that way. Right? Um, I mean, we're talking about parenting. I mean, that's just a big part of parenting. There's a phrase I use. Not everyone loves it, but I think it's just really honest. Like sometimes we have to do like damage control. You
Right.
know, like what would be best for stressed out, overwhelmed parents is if they had access to all of the support and resources they need to raise children, which means like a reasonable income for the amount of children they have and for the place that they live and community support and places to go where you don't have to pay money to be there, right? And all of these things would be ideal. But as much as I wish it was going to happen, we're probably just not going to get all of those things by the time that and I'm sorry to say that to people who maybe have like a 2-year-old. I should talk to
Right.
someone who had like a 3-something-year-old. Like probably by the time they're 14, we're still not going to have figured all of that out on a cultural society level.
Right.
And that means that we have to say like, oh, the best thing that could happen is that the expectations and the support were all like reasonable and there and present.
Right.
But since that's not going to happen, there are things that I can do to support myself through the process that is stressful so that the stress of that process does not act as like deleteriously
Mhm.
on your mind and heart and psyche and body and all the things.
Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for listening so far. I hope you're getting as much out of this episode as I have. I just love Jim. I love his heart. I love his mind and the work that he does. And so far we've talked about um, how handcrafted mugs feel special to us. We've also went over how people have different responses to stress and how herbs can help with those responses. And also just how overwhelming it can be to be a parent in modern society and some of the things that we are doing and can do about that, just to be a little more mindful and intentional with our days. So um, I keep my episodes to a half an hour or under to provide the most value for your time. And so I'm cutting this episode off mid-conversation, but I am making several other episodes with the time that we've had together. So if you have more time than a half an hour today, go ahead and head over to our next episode. Otherwise, we will see you when you have another spare moment. And I am so grateful
that we are connected.